You could hear it in his voice. The fury, the frustration, the unraveling of a man who thought the gavel gave him the last word. Chief Justice John Roberts wasn't just raising his tone. He was losing control. The setting was official, the lighting dignified, but the moment, it was anything but ordinary. He pounded down sentence after sentence, trying to corner her, but AOC stood, unshaken, unflinching, unmoved. Not because she wasn't under attack, but because she was already ahead of it. No one expected her to respond like that. They expected fire. They expected resistance. What they got was precision. She waited. Let the roar echo. Let the chamber absorb the arrogance. And then, 7 words, delivered like a razor's edge. No shouting, no panic. Just calm, cutting clarity. And that was it. No one said a word. Roberts didn't even finish his breath. The entire room knew. She had ended it. What were the 7 words? You'll hear them. But first, understand this. The story you're about to witness is dramatized. But the stakes, the truths it speaks to, are real. The power imbalance, the politics of tone, the idea that authority can be challenged not by volume, but by verbal precision. This isn't just content, it's commentary, not just fiction, but a reflection of everything we hope public servants can be when the moment demands more than silence. She didn't win by force. She didn't win by spectacle. She won because in a room designed to silence, she made 7 words impossible to ignore. Let's begin. Capitol Hill, 9:01 a.m. The room looked still, but underneath it buzzed like a beehive just before the smoke. Inside the chamber, cameras blinked red like watchful eyes. Microphones were hot. Every chair on the dais had been filled early, every aide briefed twice, and every congressional staffer knew what this hearing was about. Damage control. But no one in that room, not even the most seasoned committee chair, knew it was about to become history. And in the middle of it all, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in silence. She didn't scroll. She didn't talk. She didn't posture for the cameras. Instead, she flipped through a folder of notes with calm precision, line by line, question by question, highlighted tabs on reproductive rights, constitutional precedent, and one lone post-it in her handwriting that read, "Ask what makes them uncomfortable, then wait." Her blazer was charcoal gray, her lipstick muted, her hair pulled into a neat bun, not to impress, but to make sure nothing distracted from the words she was going to choose like scalpels. Because today wasn't about image, it was about truth, and she'd come dressed for clarity. In the background, staffers murmured, some nervous, others overconfident. One Republican aide whispered, "Bet she's got TikTok lines ready." A Democrat whispered back, "Bet you won't be smirking in 20 minutes. The room wasn't hostile, not yet, but it wasn't neutral either. It was a match waiting for flame, and everyone knew the spark would come from AOC's side of the table. But no one expected him to walk in. There was no announcement, no formal motion, no protocol, just the sound of heavy oak doors creaking open. Then, "Mr. Chairman, the Chief Justice of the United States has entered the room." Silence, and then gasps, audible, unrehearsed. One reporter dropped their pen. Another elbowed their cameraman. Is he supposed to be here?" The chairman blinked twice as if someone had rewritten the script in real time. One intern in the back visibly mouthed, "What the hell?" The CNN live feed jolted. The banner at the bottom scrambled to update. AOC didn't flinch. She closed her folder, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes followed the movement in the room like a trained litigator tracking a witness about to perjure himself. Chief Justice John Roberts walked in without a robe. That was the first tell. He wasn't here as the institution. He was here as the man who made the ruling and couldn't stomach being questioned about it. His navy suit was immaculate, his crimson tie sharp enough to cut tension on its own. The posture was familiar, chest out, chin level, gaze forward. It was the posture of someone used to never being interrupted. But this wasn't the Supreme Court. And the silence wasn't respect, it was shock. Roberts moved like a man who believed rooms adjusted to him, not the other way around. And the truth? He wasn't entirely wrong. For 2 decades, his tone had shaped the legal spine of the nation. But now he was walking into a room where his decisions would be questioned not by deference, but by facts. He sat himself in the witness gallery, unscheduled, uninvited, and unafraid, at least on the outside. One aide murmured, "Is this a protest? A performance?" Another whispered, "It's a preemptive strike." AOC leaned slightly toward her aide, her voice low but piercing. "He came to control the story. He's about to become the headline." And with that, the game changed. The script, if there ever was one, was dead. The hearing was meant to review the Supreme Court's shocking new decision to remove federal protections for minors seeking reproductive care. Under the new ruling, even minors who had been raped could be denied medical access, depending on the state. No exceptions, no bypasses, no mercy. The language was clinical. The consequences were cruel. The ruling had drawn outrage nationwide. And the court's justification? Respecting state authority. Translation? Responsibility deflected. Roberts had authored the opinion, and now he was sitting just feet from the woman most capable of tearing its foundation apart, with surgical precision and live cameras rolling. AOC didn't raise an eyebrow. She didn't perform for the audience. She simply reached into her folder and pulled out the first page again. Not because she needed to read it, but because she wanted him to see the yellow highlighter across one particular line. Injustice does not become justice simply because it wears a robe. That line was about to leave paper and walk straight into the fire. He didn't wear the robe today. That was the first signal. Chief Justice John Roberts walked into the room not draped in the black judicial cloth that symbolizes neutrality and solemnity, but in a tailored navy suit and a blood-red tie, knotted so tight it looked like it was strangling the last threads of institutional pretense. The robe wasn't necessary. His power came without it, and he knew it. Every step he took echoed louder than it should have in the hardwood chamber. Not because his shoes were loud, but because his presence demanded silence. People moved like they were standing in the shadow of something sacred, or something they were told was sacred. AOC watched him with a stillness that wasn't passive, it was tactical. From a distance, Roberts still looked exactly how history books like to imagine justice. Silver hair combed back with impossible precision, face aged just enough to suggest wisdom, but not decay. Posture upright like a man who believed gravity was beneath him. His voice, when he finally spoke, landed like polished glass. Smooth, reflective, breakable, if you had the nerve to hit it. "I'm here merely to observe," he said. Observe. That's what kings used to say before watching public executions. AOC leaned forward slightly and whispered without looking up. He didn't come for accountability. He came for applause. No one responded. They didn't need to. The tremor under those 8 words cracked louder than the gavel. Roberts settled into his seat, folded his hands like he was already bored. As if this chamber, this Congress, these elected representatives were somehow beneath the institution he believed he was. Not led, not represented. Was. The irony didn't go unnoticed, because it was his institution, his court, that had just detonated the lives of thousands of young girls across America. Just 2 weeks earlier, in a 5-4 ruling authored by Roberts himself, the Supreme Court overturned what little remained of federal protection for minors seeking reproductive care. No more automatic exceptions for rape or incest unless states provided them. No more streamlined judicial bypass. No more federal fallback. The ruling's language had been wrapped in neutral-sounding legalese. The court finds no constitutional foundation for superseding states' autonomy in regulating minor consent standards. But strip away the robes and the meaning was brutal. 14-year-olds, raped, pregnant, powerless, and Roberts called it judicial modesty. The day the ruling dropped, AOC stood outside the Capitol and didn't deliver a speech. She delivered a warning. We are not dealing with legal scholars. We are dealing with political actors in robes, legislating cruelty from the bench and calling it interpretation. The clip hit 12 million views in 48 hours. And that's what brought Roberts here today. Not subpoenaed, not scheduled, not sanctioned. Just present, like a shadow that demanded acknowledgement. To observers, his appearance was a flex, a silent performance of untouchable authority. But to AOC, it read differently. It read as fear, the kind that comes when a legacy starts to crack under pressure, when a woman half your age speaks the truth twice as loud without ever raising her voice. And so she waited, watched, measured. Roberts had the robe. She had the receipts. He had the bench. She had the lived experience. He had the red tie. But she had the room. The murmurs faded as the chairman began formalities. But even in the boilerplate introductions, the temperature had changed. Everyone knew the Chief Justice didn't just show up. He was watching her, like a man bracing for a shot he once thought no one dared to take. AOC flipped one page forward. Highlighted line, "Institutional integrity without moral accountability is just theater." She wrote next to it, "Let's see how good he is without a script." And just for a second, she looked up. Not at her colleagues, not at the cameras, but directly at the man whose words had sentenced thousands of girls to systems that would never understand them. Her gaze didn't flinch, and neither did the truth she was about to speak. AOC is called to speak as a witness, not a prosecutor, but she came prepared. There's a silence in the chamber that doesn't feel earned. It feels staged. Cameras are rolling, the flag stands perfectly draped behind the bench, and Chief Justice John Roberts sits at the elevated center. Spine straight, expression fixed, voice neutral in that polished way only the most practiced can manage. Everything about this room screams order, control, respectability. But something's about to change. She's not here to prosecute. That's the line they tried to draw. Just a witness, they said, a voice on the record. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't come to be background noise. She came carrying something heavier than evidence: intention. She adjusts the mic as the protocol drones on. Opening remarks, titles, "Madam Congresswoman, the floor is yours." It all sounds official, sterile, like it's meant to dull the edge of what's really about to happen. She doesn't let them ease in. AOC leans forward, calm, collected, but unmistakably poised for confrontation. Not the loud kind, the surgical kind. Her voice slices through the stillness, not with volume but with direction. "Before we begin," she says, eyes locked ahead, "I'd like to thank the Chief Justice for giving me this opportunity to ask what millions want to know. Who exactly do you serve?" The words don't echo, they detonate. Across the room, aides stiffen. One Republican senator lifts their pen, then freezes mid-note. Even Roberts blinks, not in shock, but in calculation. Because that's not the question they expected. That's not a question designed for civility. It's designed for truth. And it's the moment the performance ends. Freeze frame. The air cuts. The tension spikes. Title drops across the screen. When a witness becomes the fire. Because what follows isn't a testimony. It's a reckoning. AOC doesn't back down. She doesn't apologize for breaking form. She wasn't called here to behave. She was called here to speak. And she's about to use every second of that privilege to unmask the power behind the robe. The room tries to reset itself. The chair taps a gavel. Someone murmurs about decorum. But the energy has shifted. Everyone feels it. This is no longer about polite inquiry. It's about exposing the machinery underneath the marble. She continues, steady and surgical. "We are told that justice is blind, yet rulings keep aligning with wealth. We are told the court is impartial, yet donors, dinners, and backroom ties paint another story. So before I answer a single question about my position, I'll ask again, who, doctor, you, serve?" The cameras don't cut away. They lean in. Because this isn't the version of AOC the opposition tried to caricature. This isn't fury. This is focus. Roberts sits motionless, but in his stillness is the sound of something unraveling. His authority, once towering, now feels paper thin under the weight of the one thing his bench can't gavel away: public clarity. AOC doesn't blink. The Constitution doesn't protect power. It checks it. And I will not sit here and pretend the people watching from home, people who can't afford lawyers, who can't buy access, Haven't noticed the difference between a court and a club. That line hits like a hammer. A club. A private institution masquerading as an impartial one. And she just said it in front of the Chief Justice, on the record, for the country to hear. Somewhere the clip is already being clipped. Staffers are whispering to press aides. Editors are bracing for backlash. But viewers are locked in, breath held, hearts racing, because someone finally asked the question they've been screaming at their screens for years. A OC doesn't yell. She doesn't flail. She doesn't even raise her brow. But the fire, it's already burning. And the calm, that was just the trap. The chairman tapped the mic twice. Formalities over. The hearing had begun, at least on paper. But all eyes weren't on the chairman. They were watching her. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez adjusted her mic, looked straight ahead, and didn't bother clearing her throat. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It was controlled, clean. A voice trained not for showmanship, but for surgical confrontation. The kind of voice that made people in power sit up straighter, even when they didn't want to. "Let's start with the basics," she said, flipping a page in her binder. "In the last 5 years, this court has handed down over a dozen rulings that disproportionately impact low-income Americans, people of color, and women. And yet, we're told the court is impartial." The room was silent, the kind of silence that always comes before something undeniable. In Dobbs versus Jackson, you stripped away federal protections for reproductive rights. In Brnovich, you gutted key provisions of the Voting Rights Act. And now, in Reed versus United States, you've removed the last federal protection for minors in reproductive crisis. But every time, the justification is the same. "We're just interpreting the Constitution." She paused. "Chief Justice Roberts, does the Constitution mean less when it applies to girls in poor zip codes?" That landed. Roberts, seated in the front row, crossed one leg over the other. His expression didn't move, but something behind his eyes flickered. The camera caught it. He leaned slightly forward, his tone soft, detached. "Congresswoman, the Constitution is a living document of fixed principles. Our duty is to interpret, not to emote." AOC smiled. Not a kind smile, the kind that warns, the kind you see right before the dam breaks. "Right," she said, her tone tightening. "But a decision that affects a girl in a gated community with access to private care doesn't look the same as it does for a girl in El Paso or Jackson or the Bronx." She flipped another page. The sound of paper against microphone was louder than Robert's last sentence. "Let's talk numbers. Since your court's ruling in Reed, at least 17 states have moved to block minors from accessing reproductive services, even in cases of rape or incest. No judicial bypass, no appeal process, just doors slammed shut." She looked up, straight into the Chief Justice's eyes. "You call that constitutional. The rest of us call it a crisis." One Republican tried to interrupt. "Madam Congresswoman, that's an exaggeration." But the chairman gavelled once. Too late. The clip was already streaming. Millions were already nodding. Roberts remained seated, unmoved. "We do not legislate from the bench," he said. "We return matters to the states, as the Constitution requires." AOC leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on the desk like a lawyer prepping for cross-examination. "No," she said, her voice dropping. "You return girls to fear. You return them to school hallways with bleeding secrets. You return them to courtrooms without lawyers, to judges who've never met them, and to state laws written by men who think consent begins at menstruation." She held up a printed article. The headline read, "13-year-old denied care after rape due to Supreme Court ruling." She didn't need to say anything else. The headline did the shouting. But still, she added, "This isn't theory. It's not academic. It's a girl, a desk, a positive test, a closed clinic." Roberts visibly stiffened. His tie suddenly looked tighter. She continued, her voice steady. "And yet, this court, under your leadership, says that's not your problem. Because legally, it's been handed back to the states, as if jurisdiction erases responsibility." Roberts answered, but not to her. He looked at the chairman. "The court must adhere to judicial restraint, not political pressure, We interpret what is, not what should be. AOC turned back to the microphone. Her next words weren't just for Roberts. They were for every girl watching this hearing, in every state that had turned a blind eye. No, you interpret from a bench no girl like her will ever sit on. You interpret through language designed to sound noble, but built to be cold. You call it restraint. I call it retreat. The room froze. One reporter in the gallery tweeted, "This isn't a hearing anymore. It's a reckoning." AOC opened a slim folder labeled Field Testimonies. Inside were 3 sworn statements from teenagers denied basic medical care after the ruling. One was just 12 years old. Another attempted suicide. Another ran away and was trafficked. AOC didn't read the details aloud. She didn't need to. She simply said, "Their names are sealed, but their futures are not." Then she looked back at Roberts. "And the next time you write a ruling, Chief Justice, I suggest you ask yourself, who reads your decisions with tears in their eyes? Because that's the measure of justice." She sat back. The room didn't move. The silence wasn't respect. This time it was reverence. The room was quiet, but it wasn't calm. AOC turned the page in her binder. Her fingertips moved slowly, deliberately, like she was holding more than paper. She was holding weight. Not just evidence. Not just testimony. Consequences. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture for effect. All she did was speak with the kind of clarity that doesn't ask permission. It claims space. "Chief Justice, your recent decision removed federal protections for reproductive care involving minors. You claim this was about constitutional authority. Let's explore what that authority looks like in real life." A pause, the kind of pause that wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. "We've received reports, documented, verified, that minors in multiple states have been denied access to essential health care since your ruling. One of those reports involves a teenager. She sought help. She followed the legal process. And still, the door was closed." She looked up. Her eyes didn't blink. "The only thing she did wrong was live in the wrong ZIP code." The room shifted, tension rising. No theatrics, just truth applied like pressure. "Chief Justice, if your daughters, and I ask this with complete respect, were in her position, would this ruling protect them, or would it trap them?" You could hear it. The oxygen in the room changed shape. John Roberts moved slightly. His eyes narrowed, and his reply came with formal restraint. "Congresswoman, I believe it's inappropriate to personalize legal questions with family hypotheticals." AOC didn't let the sentence settle. "With respect, what's inappropriate isn't my question. It's your comfort with dodging the answer." Boom. A dozen cameras refocused. The gallery sat frozen. The live stream comment section exploded. Did she just say that? Someone needed to. Hashtag unfair answer trending within minutes. She continued, calm as ever. "This isn't about your daughters. This is about whether your rulings apply equally or only in theory. Because the law is not just a principle on paper. It becomes real when it meets the most vulnerable." Robert's voice tried to regain footing. "The court's obligation is to constitutional interpretation, not anecdotal reaction." But AOC had already pivoted, not from the facts, but from the illusion of neutrality. "Chief Justice, the Constitution was written by people, for people, not to protect power from criticism, but to ensure that when injustice knocks, someone answers the door." Then came the quiet punch. "We're not here to debate abstractions. We're here because real lives are shaped by rulings that claim to be neutral, but land unevenly." She opened another folder. No names, no graphic details, just data, state policies, access trends, legal outcomes post-ruling. "We're watching a map of access turn into a map of exclusion, and you call that constitutional equilibrium?" Roberts remained silent, and in that silence, AOC pressed the moment further. "I'm not here to attack the court. I'm here to remind it that the country it serves is not made of footnotes and precedent. It's made of people, and when those people are young, poor, or invisible to power, they deserve more than procedural language. They deserve someone to see them." The chamber didn't breathe. So again, I ask, if this ruling disproportionately impacts people with no voice in the room, no access to counsel, and no pathway to challenge, is that justice? Or is it insulation dressed up as interpretation? She paused, 1 second longer than necessary. Because if you can't answer that without flinching, maybe the question wasn't the problem. The tension broke not with shouting, but with silence. Heavy, unmovable. AOC sat back slowly, never breaking eye contact. One final line. Quiet, but unforgettable. The law may wear a robe, but justice wears a mirror. The room grows tense. Republicans interrupt. She persists, cool and precise. Roberts begins to lose composure. Final question of the chapter. Is the robe a shield from scrutiny, or does it come with accountability sewn into every seam? There's a particular kind of silence that only exists in rooms built to intimidate. The kind where chandeliers hang too perfectly, where wood panels mute the truth, where robes and titles are meant to absorb dissent like marble absorbs footsteps. AOC didn't come here to match the decor. She came with questions, yes, but more than that, she came with a tone that no one in the chamber knew how to handle. Not rage, not outrage, but ice-cold clarity. "Congresswoman," a Republican voice snapped from across the bench. "This is not the forum for grandstanding." She didn't even turn her head. "Then perhaps we should stop turning justice into a stage." The interruption hung awkwardly in the air. Another member tried to reset the tone, invoking respect for the institution. But AOC wasn't aiming at the institution. She was aiming at the immunity that had wrapped itself around it like a velvet curtain. Her words didn't rise. They sliced. Each sentence delivered like a chisel, cracking centuries of polished stone. "You claim impartiality," she said, voice steady, "but your rulings have patterns. When money speaks, the bench listens. When rights are on the line, the scale tips one way and one way only." Across from her, Chief Justice Roberts shifted. It wasn't overt, but his hands, always folded, always composed, had begun to move. A tap of the finger, a grip too tight around the pen. Small tells, but tells nonetheless. Still, she didn't blink. "You cite tradition," she continued, "but tradition once told women to stay home, told Black Americans to stay silent, told immigrants to stay grateful. We've broken traditions before, when they broke us." The chamber was still full, but it no longer felt crowded. AOC had shrunk the room to a single question. Who gets to be untouchable, and who gets interrogated just for existing? Another Republican leaned into his mic, voice taut. "Is this an attack on the judiciary?" "No," AOC replied, her gaze now fixed on Roberts. "It's a question. One this country has waited decades to ask directly, and rarely had the chance." Roberts opened his mouth. Whether to deflect, dismiss, or defend, no one would know, because AOC didn't give him the breath. "Chief Justice," she said, still razor-sharp, "we are not here because you wore a robe. We are here because behind that robe stands power, and power demands scrutiny." You could feel the shift then, the slow unraveling of composure, the way Roberts' voice, once perfectly modulated, cracked ever so slightly as he tried to interrupt. "The judiciary," but she cut in, not loudly but definitively, "is not immune from questions, and certainly not from history." The air thickened. Even journalists in the press gallery weren't typing anymore. They were watching, leaning forward the way people do when something unpredictable breaks through a space that's been too controlled for too long. AOC placed her hand calmly on her stack of notes but didn't look down. She didn't need papers to make her next point. She'd been carrying it for years. "You sit above us," she said, "but not beyond us. This isn't monarchy. This isn't divinity. This is a republic. And your robe, your title, it was never meant to shield you from the people." Then came the pause. The kind that says the final cut is coming. She stepped back slightly, not in retreat, but in precision. "So I'll ask only once, and I will ask it on behalf of every American who's ever felt the law was written around them, not for them. Is the robe a shield from scrutiny, or does it come with accountability sewn into every seam?" The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was consequence, a moment where the illusion of untouchable authority cracked, where the room realized that questions like hers couldn't be gavelled away. They had weight, they had witness, and they had just been carved into the national memory. Across America, the clip would be replayed, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Because while others had screamed at the wall, she had simply tapped, and the echo came back hollow. Roberts didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone, refined and rehearsed, cut with an arrogance honed by decades of insulation. "You are out of your depth, Congresswoman." The room froze, not in shock, but in recognition. That sentence wasn't meant for debate. It was dismissal, prepackaged in civility, the kind of phrase designed to sound elegant while suffocating dissent. AOC didn't flinch. She let the words hover, let the tension sharpen, let the room stew in its own entitlement. Then, almost gently, she tilted her head and replied, "Out of my depth, or out of your comfort zone?" A breath caught somewhere behind the cameras. That wasn't a comeback. That was a mirror held up to power. And Roberts blinked. The air inside the chamber felt heavier now, like the oxygen had started choosing sides. AOC's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the kind of steady that unnerves men used to storms, because storms you can fight. Silence? Clarity? That's harder to escape. "You speak of depth," she continued, her eyes steady, "as though experience is a moat you built yourself. But experience that never listens isn't depth, it's detachment." The phrase hit harder than shouting ever could. Roberts shifted. A minor gesture, but enough. The illusion of immovability was cracking, and she wasn't done. "I may not sit on the bench," she said, "but I've sat with the mother who lost her son to a policy your court refused to block. I've read letters from veterans deported by laws you refused to challenge. I've walked neighborhoods you've only seen through statistics. And trust me, Justice, it gets deep." Now there were murmurs, not from Democrats, from the press, from the audience, from those who realized this wasn't just a hearing, it was an autopsy of authority. Roberts cleared his throat, perhaps to reclaim control, but AOC stepped forward, not physically, philosophically. "Your Honor," she said almost with reverence, "you wear the robe. But robes don't sanctify ideas, they expose them." Another cut, surgical, intentional. She turned for a moment toward the chamber, letting the silence set. Too often we confuse tone for truth. We think calm means credible, but some of the most dangerous rulings in our history were delivered in measured voices, inside rooms just like this one, by men who thought they were too deep to be questioned. Her hands never moved. Her posture never shifted, but her words did the work of fire and flood. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. It was too honest to be political, too composed to be dismissed. It didn't play to a base, it recentered the room. Roberts tried to interrupt. "This is still a court of law, not a classroom of—" She cut him off, but not with volume, with something scarier, precision. This is the people's house. And your job is not to teach us obedience. It's to answer, not to dismiss, the very questions that make democracies resilient. Then came the shift, not in her tone, but in everyone else's. Even the Republicans who came in prepared to roll their eyes now sat a little straighter. Because something had changed. The woman they'd once called inexperienced was no longer arguing. She was revealing. She gestured lightly to the gallery. "Out there are citizens who are drowning in systems you call constitutional. They're not asking for pity. They're asking why the most powerful interpreter of the law never seems to hear them." The moment teetered. She let it. "They didn't elect you, Justice, but they elected me. So when I speak here, it's not to perform, it's to ensure that power remembers its reflection." And finally she landed it. "You built an ivory tower. I'm just here to ask what happens when that tower forgets who carved its stones, and who paid the price to keep it standing." A pause, then, almost like punctuation written in breath. "Comfort isn't the measure of justice. Accountability is." And in that instant, the ivory tower cracked. Not from volume, not from rage, but from a voice that knew exactly how to hold a mirror up to power and refused to blink. It was subtle at first, the way Chief Justice Roberts began tapping his thumb against his knee. One beat, then faster. A rhythm of control slipping thread by thread. He had answered with formality. He had deflected with doctrine. But this hearing, this woman, refused to obey the unwritten rules that had protected men like him for decades. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply kept asking questions that made comfort impossible. And now he was cornered. Not by partisanship, by clarity. AOC had just laid out a string of legal outcomes so precise, so irrefutably tied to his rulings, that the room had gone completely still. The kind of still where even the cameras forget to zoom. She wasn't giving speeches. She was building a mirror and forcing him to see himself inside it. She ended with one line: software, surgical. Justice that hides from questions isn't justice, it's performance. And that's when it happened. Roberts leaned forward suddenly, as if pulled forward by something heavier than frustration. His voice rose, not to shout, but to slice. Maybe if someone like you spent more time studying law, you'd understand how government actually works. The room shattered, not in noise, but in stunned silence. Like history itself paused, waiting to see what would follow. There was no confusion about what he meant, not from the press, not from the aides, and certainly not from AOC. She looked up slowly, measured, eyes locked on him. "Did you just say, someone like me?" The words echoed, not off the walls, but through the walls of power. Gasps from behind the dais. The chairman sat up straighter. Even committee members who had rehearsed every second of this day couldn't hide the shock on their faces. And still, she didn't blink. "Let me be very clear," she continued. "You are the Chief Justice of the United States. You chose to walk into this room, uninvited, during a hearing about your own ruling. And when questioned, not attacked, not insulted, just questioned, your response wasn't a legal argument. It was a personal insult wrapped in institutional condescension." She paused, letting the room feel what she had just named. "Let's break that phrase down, shall we? Someone like me." She raised her hand, palm open, as if inviting the entire chamber to follow. "Do you mean a Latina from the Bronx? A woman who didn't go to prep school but to public school? Someone who waited tables before she wrote legislation?" Roberts didn't answer. He couldn't. "Or maybe you meant someone who doesn't have the luxury of being considered neutral, because my existence alone is already called political." Now she stood, not for drama, for declaration. "I have a degree in economics. I've studied constitutional law. I've questioned cabinet members, CEOs, and international diplomats. But none of it, seems to matter when a woman like me dares to question a man like you." Cameras clicked like lightning on asphalt. "What you said wasn't just disrespectful to me. It was disrespectful to every young woman who's been told to sit down, be quiet, and take notes from the same systems that never once asked for her input." Roberts tried to interject. "That's not what I meant." But AOC held up a hand, not to silence, to finish. "Intentions don't erase impact, and power doesn't erase accountability." You could feel it now. The shift. The center of gravity in that chamber had moved. The robe no longer held the power. The microphone did, and she was holding it. "You can call me whatever you want in here, but out there," she pointed toward the public, "people are listening, and they know exactly what someone like me means." She turned briefly to the chairman. "Mr. Chairman, I ask that the record reflect the exact words of the Chief Justice." The clerk nodded. The words would be in the transcript. Forever. AOC sat down, slowly, deliberately, as if sealing the moment in concrete. Across from her, Roberts was stone-faced, but no longer in control. His mask had cracked, and in its place was not dignity, but exposed fragility. The silence after was long, because everyone knew the moment had become bigger than the hearing. She didn't just check him, one political analyst would say later. She rewrote who holds the pen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand. She didn't even blink. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat completely still, back straight, hands folded, eyes locked on the Chief Justice, as if stillness itself were the most powerful language in the room. And at that moment, it was. All around her, the hearing chamber bristled with invisible static. No one moved. Not the aides behind her, not the chairman on the dais, not even the reporters, whose fingers hovered above keyboards waiting to capture whatever came next. Robert sat across from her, frozen in a posture that tried to look dignified, but was slowly collapsing under its own discomfort. His words were still echoing in the minds of those listening. Someone like you? He'd said it, out loud, on record, and now everyone was holding their breath to see how she would respond. She didn't rush. She didn't retaliate. She replied, "Someone like me?" Her voice was soft, but the room leaned in like it was thunder. Built from Bronx grit, not ivory towers. Her words were fire without smoke, calm without compromise. Someone who didn't inherit power, but learned to challenge it. Who didn't come from legacy, but from struggle. Who didn't grow up assuming she'd be heard, but made damn sure to earn it. Roberts remained stone-faced, but his silence wasn't strength anymore. It was surrender. AOC kept going. You want to talk about understanding the law? I understand what it feels like when laws forget people. I understand how precedent sounds in the ears of those who were never invited to write it. Every sentence landed with precision, not as accusation, but as revelation. This wasn't anger. This was ownership. You say I don't understand how government works. Chief Justice, I've lived through what happens when it doesn't. The gallery didn't move. The room itself felt rewired. I come from a place where broken systems aren't debated. They're survived. Where courtrooms aren't abstract. They're the final stop before someone's life gets written off. She paused, not for effect, but for honesty. And yet, here I am, sitting across from the most powerful judge in the country. Not yelling, not pleading, just telling the truth you've spent decades avoiding. A murmur moved through the chamber, low, reverent, like something holy was passing by. She wasn't finished. You may not like being questioned by someone like me, but millions of Americans need someone like me to ask what you've avoided. Her tone tightened, not out of emotion but control. Because justice isn't a performance, and your robe doesn't make you right, just protected. Roberts opened his mouth but no words came. And in that brief hesitation, AOC delivered the final blow. This hearing wasn't meant to be about you, but you made it about you when you made it about me. She let the silence return. Then with a voice even steadier than before, she said the words that would headline every screen within the hour. Thank you, Chief Justice. You just proved why you're afraid of voices like mine. She leaned back, not with satisfaction, but with completion. The room stayed frozen. No gavel could erase what had just been said. No robe could cover it. She hadn't raised her voice. She had raised the standard. And the whole world was watching. The chamber no longer sounded like law. It sounded like panic. Chairs scraped, gavel pounded, and at the center of it all, Justice John Roberts stood, not as the stoic emblem of judicial composure, but as a man unraveling in real time. His face flushed crimson. His voice, once composed and commanding, now cracked and hostile. You, he pointed, finger trembling not from age but rage, are a disgrace to Congress. Gasps. The word disgrace reverberated not just across the room, but across every screen tuned in. Headlines were already writing themselves. But AOC didn't flinch. She didn't rise. She didn't stammer. She simply sat, spine straight, hands folded gently on the table, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. The room held its breath. Then came the reply. Quiet, unshaken, and more powerful than any shout. I'm not here for grace. I'm here for truth. You could hear the floor shift beneath them, not physically, but philosophically. The balance of power, once tilted comfortably toward the robes and rules, suddenly bent toward the voice that didn't beg for permission to be heard. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged, like the moment right before thunder breaks. Roberts opened his mouth again, but now the weight of his office seemed less like armor and more like costume. The louder he grew, the smaller he looked. Every word was a nail, and he was building his own cage. "You are undermining the integrity of this institution," he barked. But AOC's eyes didn't blink. She let the accusation fall, untouched. Then she leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but intimately, as if addressing the soul of the institution itself. "You want integrity?" she asked softly. "Then start by answering the questions you've dodged for a decade. Start by explaining why decisions that reshape millions of lives are delivered in shadows, sponsored by billionaires, and defended by robes sewn from silence." Roberts raised his gavel, but she raised her voice, not in volume, but in clarity. "You accuse me of being a disgrace," she continued, "but disgrace is when power hides behind process, when justice is reduced to theater, when the people who are supposed to protect the Constitution treat it like a chessboard, moving rights like pawns." Every camera in the room locked on her. She wasn't grandstanding. She was testifying, not to the court, but to the country. "I did not come here to be liked," she said, voice steady. "I came here because the people who sent me can't afford to wait for another generation of civility while their rights are being auctioned off." The phrase landed like a slap in a cathedral. She paused, then, "Justice doesn't require a robe. It requires courage, and silence is not neutral. Silence is complicity." A Republican congressman tried to interrupt. Failed. Roberts tried to regain order. Failed. Even the gavel, slammed 3 times in desperation, couldn't pierce the spell she'd cast, because the truth wasn't just being spoken, it was being lived. AOC slowly stood, not to provoke, not to perform, but because the moment demanded elevation. She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes not with defiance, but with invitation. "To everyone watching," she said, now addressing America directly, "ask yourself this. When someone tells you that speaking truth to power is disgraceful, what are they really afraid of? The truth or the power losing control?" A pause, a shift, the weight of history pressing in. Then she leaned into the mic and with surgical calm delivered the 7 words that would ricochet across headlines, feeds, classrooms, and kitchen tables for weeks. "You can't silence what you refuse to hear." She sat back down, and the room, once roaring, was silent. Roberts didn't respond. Couldn't. He wasn't just out-argued. He was unmasked. And he knew it. No fireworks, no yelling match. Just a mic drop in real time, witnessed by a nation hungry for truth that didn't flinch. It took 27 seconds. 27 seconds from the moment AOC finished speaking for the first tweet to break containment. By minute 5, the internet had caught fire. By minute 10, it was a 5-alarm inferno. Hashtag someone like me. Hashtag Roberts meltdown. Hashtag AOCV's Roberts. Hashtag the Mick didn't shake the hashtags. Poured in like water breaking through glass. And for once, America wasn't arguing. It was listening. TikTok exploded. One edit looped her calm response over Kendrick Lamar's "All Right." Another matched her words with a slow zoom on Roberts's pale face. Threads of legal scholars began dissecting every syllable she'd spoken. Even conservative commentators paused, because the footage didn't lie. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't interrupted. She hadn't even blinked. But she'd shifted the balance of power using 9 quiet words that now echoed across every screen. When you can't defend power, you yell instead. They landed like scripture, not because they were poetic, but because they were true, raw, surgical, the kind of line that made even apolitical bystanders pause their scroll. Instagram carousels posted the quote in bold over grayscale shots of the hearing. LinkedIn influencers reframed it as leadership under fire. Even Reddit's front page, rarely united, was filled with, "This is how you check a Supreme Court robe without touching it." But while memes bloomed and edits spun, it was the reaction from those who usually stay silent that told the real story. A civil rights group posted, "This wasn't just about AOC. It was about every someone like me who's ever been dismissed, diminished, or told they didn't belong at the table." An education advocate tweeted, "Every teenage girl of color just saw the future hold its ground." And then something unexpected happened. Roberts' defenders tried to strike back, but the footage betrayed them. Every attempt to paint her as aggressive collapsed under the weight of her stillness. Every claim that she had ambushed him evaporated in the face of the facts. She'd asked a question, he'd exposed a fear, and that fear wasn't about policy, it was about presence. She didn't need to break decorum, because the moment he said someone like you, he'd broken something far older. The illusion that power always equals competence. Overnight, millions watched, but more importantly, millions recognized something in her silence. The kind of power that can't be bought, only earned. It wasn't just trending, it was transforming. AOC didn't post a selfie, didn't release a victory video. She simply tweeted the 9-word sentence. No emoji, no tags, no filter. It was retweeted 2.1 million times in 24 hours. Teachers printed it on classroom posters. March organizers turned it into banners. One woman in Chicago tattooed it on her arm before dawn. This wasn't a moment. This was a mirror, and America was finally seeing itself. Fractured, flawed, but capable of reflection. Inside the Capitol, aides whispered that the Chief Justice was furious. But even fury couldn't outtrend her stillness, because in a media-saturated age, silence is no longer absence. It's strategy, and she had just mastered it. The final viral moment came not from AOC, but from a teenage girl in Michigan. She posted a 15-second clip of herself watching the hearing replay with the caption, "My civics teacher said Congress can't move hearts. Today, AOC moved mine." Pinned below it, one comment, "I'm 14. I want to be someone like her." And maybe, just maybe, that's the scariest thing for the people in robes, because the internet doesn't sleep, and now neither does accountability. It didn't take a full news cycle, just 7 words. And the ripple was instant. By morning, #McDropJustice trended in 5 countries. By lunch, The Atlantic published an op-ed titled, "When the Bench Trembled." By sundown, you could feel it, not just in D.C., but in dinner tables, dorm rooms, radio stations, even pulpits. Something had cracked. The commentary surged. Obama, in an unannounced university forum, said, "What we witnessed yesterday was not chaos. It was clarity wrapped in courage." Oprah posted a single word with a video of AOC's moment. Unapologetic, no filter, no frills, just raw, exacting admiration. And then, with almost comic contrast, came Roberts' response. A press release, 4 paragraphs, measured to the comma, polished to the point of invisibility. He didn't name her, didn't address the exchange, only issued a generic statement of regret if any moments were perceived as overly passionate, claiming respect for institutional decorum remains paramount. It was the verbal equivalent of spraying perfume on a burned curtain. The nation saw through it, and so did AOC. No press conference, no team of advisors, just one tweet sent from her own account, written in her voice, surgical, unsparing. When a man in power gets questioned and breaks, the question wasn't too harsh, the mask was too thin. That tweet hit harder than a verdict. Within minutes, it lit up threads of professors quoting Foucault, teenagers editing TikToks of Roberts glitching mid-session, and veterans messaging, "That's the kind of spine we fought for." But what made it unforgettable wasn't just the viral reach. It was the emotional recoil from those who thought they were untouchable. Several conservative commentators tried to pivot. She was too aggressive. She doesn't respect the court. She's turning hearings into headlines. But that narrative couldn't breathe, because AOC never shouted. She never pounded the table. She didn't torch the room. She froze it. And in politics, where flame is common but cold flame is rare, that's what shook them. The restraint, the precision, the unapologetic demand for answers. A Georgetown law professor summarized it best. She didn't destroy decorum. She revealed how fragile it always was when challenged by a woman, by a Latina, by someone unbought. In the aftermath, polls shifted. AOC's favorability among independents jumped at 12 points. Her approval with veterans under 40? Up 18%. But numbers were just shadows of something deeper. She had pierced the myth of invincibility. Roberts, for decades seen as the immovable guardian of neutrality, had blinked, and America didn't unsee it. Meanwhile, cable panels buzzed. Was she right to say it? Was the question fair? Would it trigger a constitutional crisis? But those debates missed the real shift. She didn't just challenge a judge. She cracked open a conversation long sealed behind formality. Who holds the holders of power accountable? Not with scandal, not with rumor, but with a microphone and the courage to hold it steady. Later that evening, as clips replayed across social media, one stood out. A high school civics teacher had paused AOC's speech mid-sentence and told her class, "That right there, that's how you speak truth when the room dares you to whisper." It was no longer just about one moment. It became a template for resistance, a case study in balance, fury without theatrics, justice without apology, intellect with edge. And while Roberts' name trended for all the wrong reasons, AOC's words printed onto t-shirts, stitched into protest banners, and headlined digital zines titled "The Cold Flame Doctrine." By midnight, one tweet resurfaced, an old one, written by AOC years before, now reposted by millions. "I'm not here to make noise. I'm here to make history echo." And history had just echoed. The moment trended, but the movement began after. Across the country, a ripple turned into a roar. Women, from courtrooms, classrooms, clinics, began sharing stories under one phrase: hashtag someone like me. It wasn't just a hashtag, it was a reckoning. A Latina lawyer in Chicago posted a photo of herself at her firm's mahogany courtroom table, captioned, "When I walked in, they thought I was the intern. Now I lead the litigation team. Hashtag someone like me." A black teenage girl in Atlanta recorded herself debating her history teacher after being told stay neutral on reproductive rights. She ended her clip with AOC's words, "Someone like me doesn't get silence handed down. We earn it." By sunset, the phrase crossed borders. A nurse in El Paso, a coder in Oakland, a city councilwoman in Miami, each told a story not of victimhood, but of visibility, and AOC reposted every one of them. She didn't comment, didn't center herself, just quote retweeted a single line with each one. Representation doesn't end with a seat. It begins with a stare. The stare, that moment when a young woman walks into a room and the temperature changes, where the air is coded and the expectations already written in someone else's font. It wasn't about fragility, it was about friction and fire. AOC had touched that fire, and instead of backing away, she turned it outward. In a podcast interview that evening, she was asked, "Did you plan that moment?" She paused, smiled, then, "You don't plan to be underestimated. You just learn to weaponize it." The quote was clipped, remixed, and turned into audio over Instagram Reels showing women walking into boardrooms, courtrooms, kitchens, labs. But this wasn't just a vibe. Two law professors published a column titled "Judicial Gaslighting Engendered Microaggressions in Real Time." They dissected the Roberts moment frame by frame, showing how power isn't always shouted. It's implied, sometimes through posture, sometimes through the phrase, "someone like you." Meanwhile, Chief Justice Roberts' office released no clarification, no apology, and that silence said more than any statement. In a DC classroom, a teacher played the hearing for his students. A girl raised her hand and asked, "Is he allowed to say that?" The teacher hesitated, then answered, "He's not allowed to go unchecked." In response, the class wrote letters, not of protest, but of presence. Each started with "someone like me," followed by what they hoped to become. The letters were mailed not to Roberts, but to AOC. She posted one, handwritten in pencil, with uneven spelling, but perfect clarity. "Someone like me wants to be the one who makes the rules, not just follows them." And in the caption, she added, "Let's make sure she gets there." It didn't end with hashtags. By the next morning, the American Bar Association released a rare public statement. Judicial temperament must not be immune from scrutiny, especially when wielded in rooms where dissent is punished with condescension. The phrase spread like lightning. By noon, Columbia law quietly rescinded Chief Justice Roberts' honorary recognition, citing a reconsideration of public leadership values. That sentence alone sparked an emergency meeting of the university's ethics committee. Leaked minutes showed students had marched outside Dean Kessler's office chanting, "Not in our name." Harvard Law followed suit, but louder. A roundtable was announced. What is judicial ego? It wasn't a question, it was a warning. Panelists included sitting judges, professors, and, unexpectedly, 3 first-year students who had gone viral with a TikTok takedown of Roberts' dismissive tone. One wore a sweatshirt that read, "Someone like me has a voice." The public watched, but institutions were listening. Law schools, bar associations, civil rights groups. They didn't just repost AOC's words, they reframed them as case law. In classrooms from Berkeley to Boston, the clip of Roberts saying "someone like you" became the new Plessy moment. An instant so coded, so loud in its restraint, that even the silence around it screamed. Cable news panels debated whether a sitting justice should be censured. But the real shift came when a small-town judge in Arizona, white, conservative, Reagan-appointed, published an op-ed titled, "Roberts Spoke, I Cringed." He wrote, "I've disagreed with Representative Ocasio-Cortez on nearly every policy, but what I saw wasn't politics. It was a woman defending dignity in a room built to ignore it." That line got reprinted in The Atlantic, then Time, then Le Monde. And through it all, AOC never gave another interview. No press tour, no gloating post. Just a single pinned tweet. "Power isn't the robe you wear, it's what you fear when someone without one speaks anyway." There was no red carpet, no standing ovation, no confetti. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked back into Congress the Monday after the hearing like it was just another day. But it wasn't. Not for America, and not for power. Outside the Capitol, a wall of cameras was already waiting. Boom mics reached out like questions before words were even spoken. A dozen different networks yelled her name. The frenzy of media desperation swirled, desperate for a quote, a reaction, a glare. But AOC didn't blink. She walked with her head high, but her voice low. No makeup team, no podium. Just a plain navy coat and one sentence that detonated quietly. That moment wasn't about me. It was about the millions who thought they couldn't question power and just realized they could. That was it. And yet it wasn't just a sentence. It was a signal. She could have gone on every major show. She didn't. She could have cashed in on the moment. She didn't. Instead, she went to work, committee meetings, policy drafts, briefings, floor votes. She didn't chase the flame. She became it. Inside the halls of Congress, the energy had shifted. Lawmakers, even those who'd once rolled their eyes, now paused when she entered. Not because they feared her, but because they finally understood she wasn't playing the game. She was rewriting its rulebook. Some Republicans tried to reset the narrative. She got lucky. It was a meltdown disguised as a monologue, but the public wasn't buying it. Not after watching her sit still while Chief Justice Roberts turned crimson. Not after hearing her dissect precedent like a surgeon, while others tried shouting over her like hecklers at a trial they didn't understand. And most importantly, not after she refused to gloat. One viral video showed her declining a book deal offer, whispering to an aide, "We're not done. This isn't legacy. This is leverage." In New York, a high school government class hung a banner that read, "Question everything. Start with why, end with power." Beneath it, a still shot of AOC's calm face as Roberts yelled. One photo, one flame. She had become something bigger than a headline. She was a compass, not a celebrity, not a martyr, but something far more dangerous to the status quo. An example that didn't disappear after going viral. Activists began citing her speech in local town halls. Veterans shared her lines in letters to Congress. A waitress in Arizona taped her quote, "You don't fix corruption by respecting silence," to the inside of her apron pocket. And while the nation spun, she kept showing up. Every committee hearing, every policy draft, she sat, she listened, and when she spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the floor. Even her critics started whispering different tones behind closed doors. She's not just fiery, She's strategic. She knows the Constitution better than most of us. She doesn't aim at people. She aims at systems. And perhaps that's what unnerved them the most. Because you can dismiss a protest, you can smear a moment, but what do you do with someone who refuses to vanish? In the background, rumors grew. Some said the White House wanted her on their shortlist for a judiciary reform task force. Others whispered she'd already drafted a resolution titled the Equal Accountability Act, targeting judicial ethics transparency. She neither confirmed nor denied. Instead, one night, she posted a black screen with white text, "Power doesn't fear rage, it fears return, so keep showing up." 12 million people shared that image in under 48 hours. And in the darkest corners of institutional arrogance, you could feel the tremor. She hadn't won the moment by destroying someone else's career. She had done something far more revolutionary. She had made millions believe the microphone might one day belong to them. At Yale, it starts with a question on the projector. Who cracked first? The one who shouted or the one who didn't? The classroom is silent. No one moves. Then the professor plays the video. 2 clips side by side. Left screen, Chief Justice Roberts, flushed with anger, voice tight, words spiraling into condescension. Right screen, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, motionless, composed, not smiling, not flinching, listening, like she's giving him the rope. The professor pauses the video just before her response. He turns to the students and says, "Watch closely. This isn't theater. This is legal history." In schools across the country, it's no longer the Roberts hearing. It's the breakdown lecture, taught in ethics, constitutional law, and gender in public space. A clip from the exchange is played at Georgetown with no sound. The professor simply writes on the board, "Judicial temperament." Then underneath it, "Power under pressure." Then, "Fear of difference." Then, hashtag "someone like me." One student raises her hand. Why did he say that to her? The professor doesn't answer. She rewinds the footage. She plays the silence again. And then she says, because when institutions feel threatened, they don't attack policy, they attack personhood. At Columbia, a new case study replaces Marbury versus Madison in the first week of Introduction to Power and Precedent. It's titled Ocasio-Cortez versus Roberts, When Gender, Race, and Jurisprudence Collide. It's not just the moment he lost his composure. It's the centuries of composure women of color have been forced to maintain. And the 1 second where one of them didn't blink. A visiting judge watches the clip with his clerks. He mutters under his breath, "She didn't even raise her tone." A student replies, "She didn't have to. History raised it for her." Law professors cite the moment as a living artifact of modern constitutional behavior. One Harvard lecture series titles their next course, From the Bench to the Brink, Judicial Ego in the Age of Social Memory. In student lounges, posters go up of AOC's expression, still, fierce, unbroken, with the caption, "This is what the face of restraint looks like, and this is what power fears." In Texas, a conservative law professor goes viral for a TikTok where he admits, "This isn't about ideology, it's about identity." The courtroom cracked, and she didn't. The moment becomes more than just legal, it becomes generational. Clips of her response get paired with Nina Simone's "Ain't Got No, I Got Life." Others remix it over Billie Eilish's "You Should See Me in a Crown." One student writes in her final essay, "Roberts snapped because he saw what he couldn't unsee. A woman younger, browner, and calmer than him, holding more power than he could control without ever raising her voice." AOC never comments on the breakdown, but weeks later she visits a law school in New Jersey. She sits in the back of a constitutional law class as students debate her moment. No announcement, no fanfare. At the end, one student, a quiet girl who hasn't spoken all term, turns to her and says, "Thank you for teaching us what silence can do." AOC just smiles and responds, "Silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes it's the sound power makes when it knows it's been cornered." Across corporate America, a new phrase enters the boardroom. Don't have a Roberts moment. It's no longer just political. It's procedural. It's personal. Leadership seminars at Fortune 100 companies roll out a new module titled Composure in Conflict, Lessons from AOC. Slideshows compare traditional power responses with clips of that hearing. One slide shows Roberts' mid-outburst. The next, AOC, quiet, razor-sharp, unbothered. A Deloitte consultant whispers to a C-suite room in Houston, "We used to teach control. Now we teach calibration." In Silicon Valley, an internal email at a tech giant goes viral. It says, "Effective leadership isn't about volume. It's about value under pressure. If you're not sure what that looks like, Google the hearing." Suddenly, leadership isn't just about KPIs or shareholder reports. It's about presence, tone, precision. AOC's stillness becomes a case study in restraint-based influence. At Procter & Gamble, a CEO replays the clip before a team debrief. Not the full exchange, just the moment Roberts interrupts, and AOC doesn't blink. He says, "That's the difference between reaction and resolve." She didn't flinch because she didn't need to. Executives start asking a new kind of interview question. What would you do if publicly challenged in a room full of power? One applicant answers, "Stay still. Let the overreach speak louder than I ever could." Suddenly, there's a shift in how influence is measured. No longer the loudest in the room, but the one who makes the room listen. But with recognition comes temptation. Major brands reach out. Athleisure companies want to name a powerwear line after her. Luxury watch brands offer 6 figures to use the words "built from Bronx grit." Even a global cosmetics chain proposes an integrity palette. Bold tones with names like stillness, truth, and subpoena. AOC declines them all. No press release, no interview. Just one post to her 14 million followers. Integrity isn't a partnership. It's a posture, and I already have mine. The screenshot circulates faster than any ad campaign ever could. Within days, HR departments print it out and tape it near conference doors. Gen Z interns whisper, "She just redefined influence without cashing it." Meanwhile, some companies try to capitalize anyway. A tech firm uses the viral hashtag AOC moments in a pitch deck about disruptive calm. It backfires when employees call it corporate opportunism dressed in feminism. The backlash is swift. Not from her, from the people she represents. A Latina program manager tweets, "She didn't go quiet so you could trademark her restraint. She went quiet so we could hear our own worth." A new phrase emerges in corporate handbooks. Authenticity risk. It's not just what you do, it's what it looks like when you fake it. And AOC? She's not faking anything. She's invited to give a keynote at the Women's Leadership Forum in DC. She refuses. Instead, she posts a clip of the Roberts hearing, unedited, with a caption, "My leadership training, one chair, one voice, one refusal to play small." That becomes the quote on screensavers in HR departments across the country. On LinkedIn, a wave of essays flood the feed. Why my team adopted the AOC rule. Listen first, fire never. We replaced boardroom interruptions with Bronx stillness. Here's what happened. How AOC changed my conflict strategy in 72 seconds. Meanwhile, a small Black-owned media firm in Atlanta prints shirts that simply say, "When they yell, stand still." The first batch sells out in hours. They donate half the proceeds to a mentorship fund for first-gen girls entering law school. And yet, through it all, AOC never asked to be the example. She doesn't retweet the praise. She doesn't endorse the stories. All she does is respond to a handwritten note from a young entrepreneur who says her calm saved a career-ending boardroom fight. AOC writes, "Calm isn't weakness, it's resistance, and it echoes longer than rage ever will." The note ends up framed in that founder's office next to her first patent. Because in a world that used to reward noise, one woman proved that silence, held with conviction, could shake boardrooms, redefine leadership, and rewrite the playbook on power. And she never once raised her voice. The first letter arrived 3 days after the hearing. No return address, just a child's handwriting and a purple crayon heart. Inside, "I watched you on TV with my mommy. You asked the question I was too scared to say out loud. Thank you. Love, Lila, age 9. AOC read it twice, Not because it was long, because it wasn't. It was short, pure, and it cut through the noise like nothing else. The second letter came with a pressed white lily inside. No envelope, just a folded page and handwriting that trembled. My daughter was assaulted in a courtroom. The judge asked what she was wearing. You didn't raise your voice, but you raised her dignity. For the first time, she smiled when she saw the news. Thank you for not forgetting girls like her. That letter didn't make it to the desk. AOC folded it once more and kept it in her wallet. Close enough to feel, quiet enough to carry. By the end of the week, the office was flooded. Hundreds, then thousands. Some typed, some scribbled. Postcards from El Paso, torn notebook paper from Detroit, email printouts from single moms in Mississippi, prisoners from Rikers, grandmothers from Iowa, young men from Oakland, letters written in Spanish, Arabic, Tagalog, Braille. Most didn't start with "Dear Congresswoman." They started with, "I didn't think anyone would ever say it. I thought I was the only one." You didn't flinch. That gave me breath. One girl enclosed a drawing of a courthouse with flames behind it and wrote, "This is what it feels like. You didn't run, you stood in the fire." But it wasn't the dramatic ones that broke AOC, it was the quiet ones. One note, scrawled on the back of a grocery list, said, "Because you didn't shout, I believed I could." That one she framed, hung it on the wall in her office. No plaque, no explanation. Just the words, sealed behind glass like a promise. Staffers would pause when they passed it. Visitors would tilt their heads, and AOC would simply smile, as if to say, "If you know, you know." Some Republicans mocked the influx. Fan mail? Is that how she governs now? But they didn't understand. These weren't fans. They were witnesses. Every envelope was testimony. Every sentence, an echo of someone who had once been invisible. Even former political rivals, a few behind closed doors, sent notes of reluctant respect. She didn't just challenge a chief justice. She challenged the whole architecture of silence. And what started as a moment became something else entirely. A school district in New Mexico introduced a new civics curriculum titled Voice is Power. The first page, a photo of AOC at the microphone with the caption, "This is what courage under structure looks like." She never bragged about it, but her schedule changed. More town halls, more school visits, fewer press tours. A 12-year-old named Malik from Newark gave her a journal with a note that simply said, "You made me want to ask why and keep asking." And that was it. The shift. Because this wasn't about going viral anymore. This was about going forward. These weren't letters to a lawmaker. They were letters from the future. From kids who now knew what civic spine looked like. From parents who no longer whispered about injustice behind closed doors. From citizens who finally realized the courtroom, the Congress, the camera, they all belong to us. Each letter a ripple, each story a signal. AOC began collecting them in what she called the People's Ledger, a physical archive open to staff and interns. Not for show, for fuel. Because this wasn't the end of the arc, it was the ignition. And in the quiet moments when the cameras left and the marble halls went still, she would sit beneath that one framed note and remember. She didn't change the system in one hearing, but she cracked the glass. She made it tremble. And through that fracture, light poured in, carrying voices that were never supposed to be heard. And now, they kept coming. As the footage circulates, Roberts' approval rating nosedives. Legal blogs explode. Editorials demand judicial reform. Even senators once loyal now speak of consequences. But AOC doesn't revel. She walks to the House floor, calm, poised, unshaken, and delivers a closing line that silences even her critics. If your power falls apart when asked a question, it wasn't power, it was theater. No shouting, no finger pointing, just a scalpel made of words. The chamber holds its breath, because in that moment, dignity didn't whisper, it dismantled. And the nation finally saw what real strength looks like. Measured, unbothered, unbought. The Capitol doors swing open. AOC steps into the dusk. No entourage, no podium, No prepared remarks. Just sky above and silence around. From behind the barricades, a lone voice breaks through. Any final word, Congresswoman? She pauses, turns not with defiance but clarity, the kind that doesn't beg headlines, only history. Power doesn't need applause, it just needs to answer. Then she walks, no victory lap, no spin, just a silhouette fading into legacy. Because some exits aren't about leaving, they're about what echoes after. And America, it's still echoing. The camera lingers in AOC's office, quiet, untouched. The chair is empty, the desk is bare. But one sticky note glows faintly under a desk lamp left on by accident or intention. In black ink, 6 words whisper louder than any headline. Don't let the volume fool you. The calm one is usually right. No signature, no slogan, just clarity. And as the screen fades to black, a final line pulses across the silence. She didn't go viral. The truth did. It wasn't a moment. It was a mirror, and the whole country looked in. Hoy ChatGPT. When the world mistook silence for weakness, AOC proved that composure is strength. She didn't shout, but the system shook. Watching her, I'm reminded, true power doesn't need permission to stand firm. It just needs purpose. Have you ever been underestimated simply because you stayed calm? Sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the strongest. It's the one that refuses to flinch. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.